Hey folks, this is The Constant Show where we talk about movies, and I am Constant, the calmest of hatters. And this week, I would like to talk to you about Saw X. A group of fraudsters sell John on the false hope of curing his cancer, but he awakens to find that not only does he still have cancer, but he is angry and does want revenge. And when I tell you I was so hyped for this, every time a Saw movie comes out, no matter how many bad ones they've given me in a row, every time one comes out, I'm like, I will be there on Halloween. But I didn't really like this movie. And the main reason that I didn't like it is because I feel like it fundamentally misunderstands Jigsaw both as a character and as a concept. So I would like to paint you a verbal Venn diagram of the differences between John 1 through 7 and John from X. Spoilers ahead for almost all of Saw. Sorry, there's no way to avoid this. The earliest defining moment of John's fictional history is the loss of his child via an escaping criminal named Cecil slamming a door into his pregnant wife Jill. This broke John, but his woes were far from ended, because shortly thereafter he was diagnosed with cancer. At his lowest of lows, he tried to take his own life in a car accident. Fortunately or unfortunately, it could go either way on this one, John didn't die in that car crash. Instead, he found his will to live, and fought to survive, despite everything that he had already lost. This car crash is a defining moment in John's philosophy. He had lost his child, his wife, his health, and now even his vitality, but despite all of that, he had fought to survive. He made a choice to survive. This car crash is flashed back to in at least 2 separate movies, but beyond that, Jill, John's wife, says that a different person crawled from the wreckage. Doubly so because shortly thereafter we see John working on what would be the first trap. It's a knife blade mask for his son's killer. This is the speech that John gives his son's killer. I want to play a game, Cecil. Now comes your moment of truth. As a drug addict and a thief, you have preyed on the kindness of others to fuel your addiction. Today you're going to bring the ugliness inside of you out into the open. Now in order for you to stay alive, we have to match the ugliness of your face with the ugliness of your soul. And he says this before telling Cecil how to get out of the trap. And you'll notice that not one time during it does John say anything about that whole "you murdered my son" thing. Even his rough draft doesn't include any allusion to the loss of John's child, because it starts off with, "You're an abuser and a hustler." I think John made the right call by switching to the new version, because the old version kind of makes him sound a little bit like a rap star. But why doesn't John mention his son's loss and punishing his son's killer if it's motivated out of revenge? Well, in John's own words, I forgive you, Cecil, but addiction has ruined your life. Murder isn't the fault that John sees in Cecil, because murder isn't something that Cecil habitually does. What he does do is continually worsen the lives of people around him in order to fuel his addiction. And it is this fault that directly led to the loss of John's son. So rather than perceiving evil as some kind of external action that the person does, such as slamming the door into Jill, John instead sees it as an intrinsic part of their philosophy and decision-making process. And this is why the games exist for him, as a means to forcefully change the faults that he sees in people that lead to the faults that he sees in the world. The incident that changed John's own perspective was the extreme body harm of the car accident. Because of this, John uses extreme body harm as a twisted way to spread his version of enlightenment to others. This is clearly demonstrated in conversations that Jigsaw has with Detective Matthews in Saw 2, including such gems as,
"The jigsaw piece I cut from my subjects was only ever meant to be a symbol that that subject was missing something, a vital piece of the human puzzle, the survival instinct.
And also,
Those who don't appreciate life do not deserve life."
he even goes as far as to explicitly say,
No. The cancer isn't what started me in my work. It was the moment I decided to end my life that started me in my work.
I was determined to spend the rest of my life testing the fabric of human nature. In the simplest of terms, John believes that most people take life for granted, that there are certain aspects of them that don't permit them to see what they actually have. In the same way that he had almost nothing but could still find a reason and a will to live, he seeks to put others through that same ordeal to make them appreciate life. John X. John and X's philosophy is differentiated with a single scene. John believes that he's cancer-free and he's sitting in the park enjoying his day. He's got his notebook open, he's drawing some death traps, as one does. But then John has a moment of self-reflection. He decides to crumple up his death trap and throw it away. The implication being that now that he no longer has cancer, he's also not interested in putting people in death traps anymore. But as previously pointed out in Saw 2, John expressly says that his cancer had nothing to do with his decision-making process as Jigsaw. Prior to this, there's a lot of room for interpretation for why John does what he does. Is this a spiral into madness brought on by his mental degradation? Or is he so twisted pictures that he's moved into some kind of blue and orange morality? Having this scene in there where John decides no cancer, no Saw, kind of closes the door in a lot of interpretations. Because after this scene, the direct implication is that John is just bitter about dying and venting his frustrations with his impending mortality via putting other people into death traps. I gotta die, so you gotta die too. This can't really actually be the case though, because there's a lot of John's behavior that would directly contradict this interpretation of him as a character. Just as an example, John leaves detailed instructions for 3 separate characters to be carried out after his death. His death itself in Saw 3 was demonstrably a part of his plan, as he left a tape recorder inside of himself to be found during his autopsy. Which, if you only value your own life and not your twisted sense of righteousness, would be pointless. Let's just pretend, though, that it is logical, and that anytime John talks about Darwin, or missing pieces, or the human survival instinct, it's all just meaningless rabble. It's one thing to be lectured by a zealous intent on taking the moral high ground. It's entirely another thing for John to be a drama king about things that he doesn't even actually mean.
I know it's a little late for a life coach, but you should really hear my theory on why you suck.
Is a lot more harsh when he doesn't even actually mean it. Like, you could have just saved Office Max a transaction and just left the tape recorder on the shelf at this point, John. There are 2 other scenes that directly contradict John's previously established character. The first that we see is towards the beginning of the movie. John is in the hospital. There's an orderly who's about to steal a watch from a coma patient, and John sees this and he starts running through his head on the trap that he's going to put this guy in. He has to break his fingers in order to not get his eyeball sucked out. But when John imagines the trap, he imagines the person losing. This doesn't really make sense because John goes out of his way to espouse over and over again how he's not a murderer, he doesn't kill people. And we even have direct examples of him criticizing other characters for having traps that are designed to be lost. In Saw 3, he tells his apprentice Amanda,
You didn't test anyone's will to live. Instead, you took away their only chance. Your games were unwinnable. Your subjects are merely victims.
From Saw 5, we also have him scolding Hoffman for the same kind of behavior.
Unlike you, I've never killed anyone. I give people a chance. Everybody deserves a chance. Killing is distasteful to me.
And the second contradiction comes in a later scene. Cecilia, the true villain of Saw X, puts John into a trap with this kid. And John gets super emotional about the idea of her putting an innocent child into a death game. Totally fair. I completely understand. I feel the same way, John. Only problem is that John has expressly put multiple children into Saw games before. So just in chronological order, we have in Saw 1.
Will you murder a mother and her child to save yourself?
In Saw 2, he poisons Detective Matthew's son before throwing him inside of a safe, repeatedly pointing out how he will be
bleeding from every orifice.
In Saw 3, he puts Jeff and Lynn's daughter inside of a crate, inside of a warehouse, where multiple people will be firing guns. And my personal favorite, he let this kid just become a murderer in a Saw trap. It rings a little bit hollow when John has this overly emotional Hallmark speech about how the games are sacred and you shouldn't put children in them. John has also never minded this kind of collateral damage. I made it this far without talking about them, but let's get into the traps. John 1 through 7. John 1 through 7 is a strategic genius. He is the engineer version of the house because he always wins. His traps are a narrative woven with a part for you to play, and you will play it because he knows you, because he studied you. In Saw 3, John is dying, but he's masterminding 3 separate games, He sets Jeff, Amanda, and Lynn on highly personalized, interconnecting quests. At every junction, Jeff must make a decision of either a personal sacrifice or helping one of the people who resulted in the loss of his own child. This is a struggle that directly mirrors John's own loss and the solution that he found to it. In the most inhuman of ways, it was John's way of saying father to fathers, you gotta let go or you're gonna lose everything else. Lynn's mental health spiraled as a result of her own personal loss, and she became neglectful both towards her family and her career. Because of this, her game is that she has to keep John alive for the duration of Jeff's game. Amanda, who has been killing people in the games, just has to not kill Lynn. That's her only job. Their paths are all controlled though. So for Jeff, he's set on a video game-esque journey of closed doors that are all electronically sealed until the last one has been opened. He has to at least be physically present for the game, otherwise he will just be stuck in a room and starve to death eventually. For Lynn, she's wearing a collar made of shotgun shells that will go off if John dies, so she has to be there. For Amanda, she cares about John, so she will be there because he has died. Even the results of this interplay between these three characters is something that's fairly predictable. Jeff and Lynn, who both struggle with trust and communication, will not be able to communicate the situation to each other. Amanda will break her word and not let Lynn go. For Jeff, he's been motivated by vengeance for his entire life, so of course he's going to take it when he has the opportunity. There's not many divergent options that each of them have, and that's kind of the point, is that they're all geared towards single choices. While handling this whole trifecta of interconnecting parts, there's like 8 people, John is also leaving instructions for at least 2 more, and then a warning for a 3rd person. Handling all of that while getting brain surgery. How does he do it? Well, according to John, if you're good at anticipating the human mind, it leaves nothing to chance. All carefully structured, meticulous, accounted for. In Saw X, most of the traps feel impersonal in a way that contradicts John's signature style and MO. We have leg slicing, we got a radiation cannon, there's auto brain surgery. Thing is though, none of these actually speak to the victim, but instead speak to the victimizer. These are inherent to John's perspective and are merely a way to get them to feel what he feels. There is no lesson meant to be learned because this is vengeance in the most convolutedly simple terms possible. Even Cecilia's trap doesn't really speak to anything about her character or her psyche. Instead, it's just like, you like fighting over money. How about you fight over air? Because he wasn't really prepared for this. Somehow, despite having a tiki head cooker and a radiation cannon on standby, John acted entirely out of emotion, hastily rushing to punish his foolers before he really knew anything about them. This is the same kind of thinking and mentality that John would criticize Detective Matthews for in the next chronological movie. And unlike the Jeff example, where there's this dark mirror of John imparting his own philosophy onto them, instead it just makes him a blatant hypocrite. Detective Matthews is punished for the same course of action that Jigsaw felt justified in taking. I've seen some people say that part of this is the point that John was just giving them the false hope that they would give to cancer patients, but that kind of just makes things worse. Let's contrast this with the way that John treats Cecil, his son's killer. Cecil has a winnable trap with surface level damage. It's not focused on revenge, but instead the fault that John sees in Cecil. Compare that to the demand to perform auto brain surgery or take a wire and saw through your own leg. It's weird that these characters are treated more harshly than the people who killed his son. It's almost as if stealing money from John is a greater offense than taking away his child. Let's talk about John and Saw X's plan in chronological order, because I am befuddled on just... So you kidnapped 4 of the 5 people responsible. Why you couldn't find the 5th person is a complete mystery to me. That has never been a problem in this series. There's like 60 or 70 people in traps, and not once did I ever go, but how did John procure them? In Saw 3D, Hoffman even gets into an FBI safe house in order to get Jill, so that to me seems like it would be much harder to do. So you gather them into a single warehouse room for the game. Now, normally you would have like a whole hall of mirrors for this, but today you get one room. Quick pause here. John pretends that if somebody gets injured during any of these games that he's going to have them taken to the hospital. He gets upset at Cecilia killing Gabriella for this very reason. But how exactly was that supposed to work? Oh yeah, doctor, she was skinny dipping in toxic waste. Step 3. You gotta kill a woman with a leg trap. It's necessary for the next step, we'll get into that. So step 4 is my personal favorite, and I feel like this is where the plan, you can tell it just kind of went off the rails. Step 4 is that you put a cart with a cell phone on it directly out of reach so that they have to use like woman's intestines to wrap around the outside of the cart so that they can pull the cart closer so that they can grab the cell phone. I'm already at so many different problems with this. One, why not just accidentally put the cart closer? Or 2, put the cell phone on the ground. Or if you want them to discover it, you just put like a spiral on rock and then you put the phone under the rock. I don't think having them do all this was vital to your plan. Now, step 5, you correctly assume that for no reason whatsoever, Cecilia will actually call her 5th conspirator who is pretending to be a cancer patient so that he arrives, so that when he arrives, you can show him the Saw game and be like, ha, we're getting revenge, even though you know the whole time that he's secretly evil. Now, step 6, you let the evil boyfriend get the drop on you because you gave him a gun, and then you let him put you and your only accomplice into a trap that will teeter-totter, pouring blood into both of your faces. And you did not program a way out of this trap. There's why would you put yourself in a situation where you're completely defenseless when you didn't even have to do that? 3, once you're defenseless, you have no control over that situation, so it's entirely possible that Cecilia just decides to nut punch you 50 times. Or murder you with any of the 9 murder weapons that you've left laying around in this room. Even if all of this was according to the plan, why would you use actual blood if you know it's going to be poured into your own face? I don't get it. You could use water and food coloring. I don't think they're gonna look that closely, John. You didn't have to do any of this, really. Step 7. You hope that Cecilia and her secretly evil boyfriend will walk into the room together, and then the room will close behind them, and it only has a single air hole. Well, there's only one real problem with that. If one of them decided to, stay with John and Amanda as they were in the trap, and then the other one went to go get the money, then once the door closes, the person in there would just be able to stick their head out, and then the person downstairs would still be at an advantage because both of you are tied up in this trap. I guess it unlatches whenever the door closes, but still, I think this guy could take both John and Amanda. I don't think John is contributing much to a fistfight. Even if everything goes perfectly with this plan, it's just super dumb. I struggle to believe that the John who is handing out multiple L's in Choose Your Own Adventure Torture Edition would be struggling with such a haphazard, absurd series of missteps. He left almost all of this game outside of his control, and that feels disingenuous to the character. All of that out of the way, we can talk about why this is conceptually an error. John 1 through 7 is meticulous. Every plan is carefully crafted over months, if not years, where he's studying every part of it. He allows for no error outside the unreliability of human character and the unpredictability of human nature. Did you know that up until Spiral, there are 62 death traps in the series, and this entire time only 3 of them have been cheated? In chronological order, in 4, when Detective Matthews smashes his ankle to get out of the ankle cuff that we saw in Saw 1, and 5, where Strom gives himself a tracheotomy to get out of the water box. Although that one didn't really have a solution, he kind of cheated it though. And in 3D, when Hoffman uses the bars of a window in order to prevent the reverse bear trap from going off. That leaves us with about 59 separate traps that all went off perfectly. Many of these were even tied together in a string of a series of traps that also went off perfectly. Because the real horror of Saw is not your limbs being twisted, or poison gas, or having to break a finger, or radiation cannons. It's instead a relentless, psychopathic, genius engineer who has spent his time studying you for any kind of fault that he can find to put you in a death game with a choice that you will probably lose. In Saw X, it seems like there's this attempt to recontextualize John and inject more humanity into his character, either by having Cecilia be an evil evil, or by having John have this morality moment with the kid, or by making him more vulnerable by just having a plan that sucked. It's like if I was directing a Jason movie, and then like half the movie, he was like lost in the woods trying to figure out where the kid's gone, but then he eventually kills him anyways. John is superhumanly evil. He's a beyond human level genius in both engineering and psychology. Just a stalking horror, almost like your Michael Myers or your Jason. And I say, we just let John be the monster that he is. You don't have to inject humanity into his character, because he already lost all of it by Saw 1, where he put Dr. Gordon and Adam into traps, both of them for just doing their jobs. And then these are some jokes that I put at the end, so that if you're still watching at this point, you can hear them. These killers aren't relatable enough. Chucky, I mean, let's give him like actual doll anatomy, because they'll root for him, because now it's like harder for him to stab people. It's Jason, but the whole movie it's raining outside, so he has like a PTSD episode, so he's indoors. It's Hellraiser, but the kid who finds the cube is a Rubik's Cube enthusiast who does a lot of puzzles, so he just spends all day, every day, just opening and closing the box on Twitch. He's very close to the world record. It's The Exorcist, but hear me out, it's a documentary. What if Freddy, but it's like Inception, so he can kill you in your dreams, but like dreams are also still super weird, so he's like trying to get through like mountains of spaghetti and like penguin soldiers. It's like a Seussian nightmare, and he never actually kills anybody because it's set in present day, so nobody sleeps anymore.